Hello, welcome back. This is the tortoise we're going to be painting for World Watercolor Month, Day 3. And I found this guy on unsplash.com. The prompt is time for Day 3, and tortoises live for a very long time, and they're cute, so that's why I picked a tortoise to paint. And I chose to use my Derwent Graphitint paints instead of traditional watercolors. They have a grittier look to them, almost, I don't want to say dull, but a little bit more earthy, and I thought they would work well for the tortoise. If you don't have the Graphitint paints, you could definitely use watercolor, you could use Inktense, you could use water-soluble graphite and do a monochromatic painting. It's pretty versatile. I'm painting the background first, just so I can get a feel for these paints again. I haven't used them in a while, and they don't act like regular watercolor on paper. Whatever binder is used, it doesn't feel like the same slippery kind of binder that most watercolors have. So it kind of just sits where you place it on the paper. And that's good because it doesn't bleed as much, so you have a little bit more control over them. However, because it just sits there, you have to work at blending the paints with each other a little bit more. Right here, I'm going in with a pretty dark green-gray tone, and I'm not afraid of jumping in this early in the painting with dark values. These paints lift really well, especially if you don't let them dry on the paper right away. If you put it down the paint and you realize, oops, I've made a mistake, all you have to do is clean your brush off in some water, dry it off on your towel, and it should suck up whatever paint that you want removed off your painting. Over here, I'm going in and putting down a base layer for the tortoise body and the ground. They both have warm undertones, and I wanted to make sure I get that color down before I put in any details. Now, I didn't need to let that base layer dry completely before I went in and dry brushed some of this dirt texture. I normally don't go in with super darks this early in a painting, but because the body of the tortoise and the sand didn't have a lot of light values, there was just a lot of midtones. I wanted to make sure I got my darks in so I could more accurately assess my midtones later on in the painting. Right here, I am wetting down the tortoise's shell so I can drop in some of the color, and you can see that this paint just stays right where you put it. Now, when I start painting his creases of his body and the shadowing of where his body disappears into his shell, I want to make sure that I am going in with really dark values. That's what's going to give the illusion of space, and those dark areas are going to really recede into the background. This set of paint has many options for you to choose when you're deciding on a dark tone. I stuck with the blues and the grays, but there are some gorgeous purples that can give you a really nice dark shadow. One thing to keep in mind as you're building up your values, because these paints lift so easily, if you go in with some pigment and you realize you didn't go as dark as you should have, let the paper dry before you go in with more pigment. If you don't, you're going to be fighting against yourself, and you're going to be lifting previous pigment while you're trying to put down new pigment. It's just not going to work. I skipped a little bit ahead here in the process. Building up the tortoise's shell took quite a bit of time. I started off with really light background layers, and then I let it dry, go in, put in a little bit more of a background, and then finally I started going in with some line details. And if I thought those lines looked a little bit too harsh, I could just go in with some water and blend them out a little bit. And right here, you can see me going in with that second layer of a base color before I go into any line work with that section of the shell. Now, working on the spurs of the tortoise's leg was one of my favorite things to do. I used one of the cranberry red colors, and I mixed it with a little bit of dark gray. And I started outlining the spurs, and then I was able to go in with some of the tan color and kind of create little shadows and blend marks. And I didn't use too much water when I was going in with the really deep colors. I didn't want that particular part to bleed at all. I wanted some strong definition, so I kept my brush pretty dry. This is a very tedious process, so I am speeding up the video quite a bit over here. And onto the tortoise's adorable little face. I don't know why I think they're so cute, but I love their little eyes and their little pig noses. To maintain some dimension on his face, I want to make sure that I keep the right side in shadow, so I'm building up that side with more layers of pigment than the left side of the face. And I love putting in animals' eyes. Even though the painting isn't even close to finished, just adding that little darkness brings life to his face right away. And you can see I keep going from painting his shell to painting his face, back to painting his shell. And the reason why I'm doing this is because at this point, I do want to make sure my layers dry between each additional layer. Because even though these paints don't bleed too much, once I get into a small detailed area of the painting, I want to make sure I have no bleeding whatsoever. So I skipped a little bit ahead again. I repeated the same process on his left leg that I did for his right leg. And now I'm just going in and adding some additional shading on his face. And as I work on him, I keep reevaluating if the painting as a whole is balanced. I'm noticing that his shell on the left side is a little bit too light still, so I'm going to go in and add more color. And at this point, I'm just tweaking the painting. I keep referring back to my reference photo, making sure that there's good contrast between the light areas and the dark areas of the painting. I didn't want to make the same mistake that I made yesterday and have not enough contrast and have this painting look muddy. And as always, my absolute favorite part of a painting is when I pull off the tape and see how it looks with that border. And I'm pretty happy with him. He's a big improvement over my painting from yesterday. If you have any questions about my process that I may have skipped over, please let me know in my comments down below. Thanks so much for watching. See you tomorrow.